Hello, and welcome to this talk on reported speech in Western Subanon. I'm Rebecca Paterson, and I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors, Hugh Paterson and Bill Hall. By reported speech, we follow the definition of Spronck Nikitina 2019, in which they say, reported speech is a representation of an utterance as spoken by some other speaker or by the current speaker at a speech moment other than the current speech moment. So we are basically looking at quotations, and the texts we will look at today are all three narratives. Here's an outline of the talk, and we will just walk our way through. Western Subanon is a language of the Philippines, primarily spoken on Mindanao. Hall 1983 discusses in great detail the various genres of formal speech in Western Subanon. Most of the genre that are discussed are dialogues. However, he does include a list of monologue genre, as we see on this slide. The texts we survey today are told as monologue by a narrator, but all contain dialogue between the characters. It's the character dialogue reported by the narrator that is the area of investigation. In this study of reported speech constructions, we look at three texts. The first is called The Newlyweds. It has a total of 34 lines, and 11 of those lines contain reported speech. The second story, Deer and Freshwater Snail, abbreviated DS, has 27 lines, and 7 of those contain reported speech. Cat and Rat is our third story, and it's the largest. It has 60 lines, and more than half of those lines are reported speech, 35 lines with reported speech constructions. I'll outline our methods briefly here. The texts were collected by Bill over the years, and these texts were then interlinearized in Flex. Then the texts were exported from Flex in the .flex text format and then converted to an ELAN format using the program called ELAN Tools, which was developed at ELAN-CorpA CNRS by Hantgan and Chanard, which also allows for the application of the speech reporting template by Nikitina et al. 2019 to be applied to the ELAN file. That template allows for annotating reported speech on various tiers. Hugh annotated the text for reported speech, and I used the ELAN-CorpA multiple file search to query the data and look at the diversity of structures that occur across the texts. 43 of the lines across the text, which are roughly equivalent to sentences, are involved in reported speech, either containing the clause introducing a report or the report itself. So that works out to 53 out of 121 annotations. Here are a few definitions before we get into looking at the annotated data. DR event is a label that we use for a clause that introduces a quotation. It stands for discourse reporting event. A discourse report is the quotation itself, the content of what was spoken. The label quotative is used for a grammaticalized particle that introduces a quotation. And bare quote is the label used for a quotation that has no introductory material. Just briefly, let's look at what the template looks like in the ELAN framework. On the tier labeled QT, which is short for quote or quotation, there are several options to choose from. It has a limited set of options, and the label that corresponds most closely to what occurs in the text is what gets used for that particular instance of reported speech. This is the basic categorization that we're going to be looking at. So now we're going to move on to a survey of those constructions used across these three texts. As I said before, there are 53 annotations in the text that include reported speech. And based on the template-driven typology, there were 39 reported speech constructions that consisted of a discourse reporting event and a discourse report. The plus sign here only indicates that both occur in the annotation. It does not indicate the order of those particular units. There were 2 instances of sentences where the discourse reporting event occurred along with a report and a quotative. That is, both a quotative and another clause that contained a speech verb occurred with the report. So from this view, out of the 53 annotations of reported speech constructions, we can see that the vast majority of them, 39, are of a certain structure. To a lesser degree, bare quotes are used, and the quotative can also occur introducing a report. In Western Subanon, the grammaticalized quotative is the form long, and it's annotated in these texts as a quotative when it occurs with no argument structure. The most rare among the speech reporting constructions in the text are the two where the discourse reporting event occurs inside the discourse report, and then one instance of when the quotative occurs inside the discourse report. Also note here that the category other was used for two annotations where there were instances that were not readily classifiable in the template schema. But if we dive deeper, we'll see a different distribution. In the column labeled all, we see the same numbers as from the previous table, totaling 53. Then I've broken it down by story so that you can see cat and rat, abbreviated CR, has 34 instances of discourse reporting events occurring with a report. That is the vast majority of the 39 annotations of that type. The other stories have more of a different distribution of introductory structures. The newlywed story has by far the most diversity in how the reports are introduced. Something that is not captured in the template on the QT tier within the data we were just looking at is that the quotation tier identifies the category of the entire speech construction, but it doesn't indicate the order of the elements. An additional tier is available called the RP tier or the report tier, and that indicates the order of the components. In one, we see an example of the specific order discourse reporting event followed by the discourse report. This roughly translates to, and so the hornbill asked, which is the event, followed by the report, which roughly translates to, where are you headed, rat? The template is designed to capture the components of the reported speech construction in the QT tier, but not the order of those components. And in this second example, we see the category assigned for this reported speech construction in the QT tier is the same as the previous slide, necessarily DR event plus discourse report. However, in this example, the order of the two elements is the reverse of what we saw on the previous slide. In 2, we see the order of elements is report first, and then the occurrence of the event, which roughly translates to, now, you are really indeed speedy in running, thus said Mr. Deer. So the template is a more powerful tool when the combination of the two annotation tiers is used to query the data. The template allows you to categorize types that are common across languages, but it does not necessarily capture the full diversity of types in a specific language. On this slide, the counts are slightly different, but they're organized on the special phenomena found in Western Subanon. For example, rather than using the label quotative, I've put in the form of the invariant quotative in Western Subanon, which has the form long. Another interesting thing to note is that the template-based category of discourse reporting event inside of a report, for which we had one instance on the previous slide, and the category of quotative inside a report, for which we had one instance. In both cases, these types occur when the initial element is an interjection-like word or a short, often CV syllable word. In fact, all cases where a report is not introduced by a discourse reporting event on the right edge, an introduction occurs at the right edge of the report. This includes the 6 otherwise bare quotes. In this slide, we can see the entire content of the deer and snail text. Although the font is small, I've coded the parts of the reported speech constructions in different colors. Introductory material is in blue, and the quotations are in orange. In column E, you can see the introductory material in blue, And in orange, you can see the reports. This way you can get a sense of the flow of things in the language itself. The text in the default black is narration, and green encodes opening and closing formula at the beginning and end of the text, respectively. In line 11, column E, you can see that when the report is divided up by the event, and the event occurs in the middle of the report, the only thing that can occur to the left of the event is an interjection. This is a tendency that's been reported by Nikitina et al. To appear. These interjections aid the interpretation of a particular clause as a quotation. You can notice in lines 5 through 7, there's an exchange between the deer and the snail. In line 5, deer calls out, "Coo, freshwater snail," and then the snail replies, "Coo." And there's no introductory material. It's just the snail speaking. And when the deer replies, it does not say, "and then the deer replied." It's just the report, the reply of the deer. In this instance, the very first thing that the deer says is this interjection-like particle, "oh." Although this is a preliminary study, the interjections occur in every instance that there is no introductory material. That is 100% of the time that speech is not introduced by the quotative long or the discourse reporting event or a discourse reporting event clause. The first element of a report is always an interjection. Since these texts were analyzed from transcribed texts, it would also be interesting to go back to the recordings and to look at the intonation patterns occurring in these instances. Bill recalled that when the stories were recorded, the narrator made adjustments to indicate something like character voices for the different speakers in the texts. In the distribution of types for the newlyweds text, you can see a similar distribution regarding the interjections. Whenever a bear quote occurs, there's a shift between speakers, for example, between lines 13 and 14. In line 13, the husband is speaking, and he begins to reply to the wife with the interjection, "te," which is translated as, "Why? Why indeed? Why are you asking me this? You told me to do it." And the wife replies, "Ah." And there's no introductory material to indicate the shift in who the speaker is. It's only retrievable from context. The shift in speaker is also aided by the use of the emotive words at the beginning, at the left edge of the quote. For the distribution types for the cat and rat story, I recognize that it's not possible to see the details of this image, but based on the way that I've coded the colors, you can see the relative size of the discourse reporting events and the reports, and you can see the cadence that is maintained across this text. This text starts with a few lines of narration, and then there's the first exchange. The discussion goes back and forth between the rat and the first hornbill. A few lines of narration occur, and then there's a second exchange, the rat and the second variety of hornbill. A few lines of narration, a third exchange between the cat and the crow, more narration, and then the principal exchange between the rat and the cat. That is followed by the largest section of narration where the cat succeeds in being invited to the rat's home. And then there's a final exchange between rat and cat. We'll see later there's a major shift in the verbs used in the discourse reporting events for the final exchange. So you can see that each text has an individual cadence, an individual rhythm. Cat and Rat by far uses the same pattern of introductory material over and over for almost every report in the text, whereas the other two stories vary in the type of introductory material that they use. So now we move on to a few remarks about the distribution and function of speech verbs used in these texts. Across the text, a large number of speech verbs are used in discourse reporting events. The most common is a root that means talk. It's used 15 times throughout the text, but you can see that 11 of those are in cat and rat. Other verbs include ask, reply or answer, hear, which necessarily reverses or presents the speaker and listener in the inverse to the rest of the verbs. Sing is used one time, and there's two different words for call. An interesting particle that often occurs is the form long. And because when coding the text, I had to choose criteria for assigning types of introductory material, When long occurs with argument structure, meaning that a speaker or addressee is present in the clause, then I include long with the discourse reporting events. This happens 12 times. 9 of those occur in cat and rat. And in that story, long never occurs with another speech verb. That is, it has argument structure and it is the only verb that occurs in the discourse reporting event. In cat and rat, it only introduces the speech of the primary character, the rat. The 9 times that it introduces the speech of the rat, it also always occurs with the speaker indicated by a full noun phrase. The form long is likely cognate with the verb to say in nearby languages. However, most verbs in Western Subanon have various shapes based on the voice interpretation chosen by the speaker. In Western Subanon, long is an invariant form and has no other shapes. When long is used without any argument structure, I've coded it as a quotative. And in each instance where the quotative occurs, it is the only indication of a speech event for that annotation. I'd like to move on now to the distribution and function of speaker marking in these texts. Across the text, speakers can be indicated in events as either a bare noun, which is in the first row, indicated by the null symbol followed by the capital N in the first row of the table. This happens 4 times. In all 4 occurrences, it is either the initial reporting event in the text or it's the final report of the text. The privileged participant case marker OG occurs with 13 instances, the majority of those in cat and rat. The non-privileged participant case marker NOG codes the speaker in 19 annotations. All 19 are in cat and rat. The case marker NI is used only in 3 instances. The 2 occurrences in the deer and snail story are only in the final exchange of the story. There's 1 instance of a pronoun encoding the speaker. It occurs in a discourse reporting event that immediately follows a clause that mentions the speaker using a full noun phrase. So it's a very close reference point. And in the newlyweds text, there are 6 instances where the speaker is not overtly marked in the clause at all. In this case, it is the exchange between the husband and the wife. Because this analysis is based on the transcribed text, we can only see the alternation of speaker based on context and the translation available for the story. But we can also identify this again by the occurrence of the interjections at the left edge of the report. Looking more into the details of the speaker marking and the discourse reporting events of each story, the 2 unmarked noun phrase speaker mentions in cat and rat encode the primary character, the rat, in 1 instance, and the cat in the other instance. The strategy is used for the initial report for the primary character and the initial report of the entire text, which is also the initial report of the entire text. The second occurrence is for the song event by the cat character, which seems to be a highlighting strategy. It's about even between the use of og and nog throughout the cat and rat story. They are both used for the rat, and they are both used for all other characters. The ni case marker is only used 1 time, and it only refers to the rat. And as I mentioned before, a pronoun reference to the speaker only occurs 1 time, and it only refers to the rat. Particular to this story, because there are more than 2 participants, I think the null marking strategy is not used because of the larger number of characters than in the other stories, which have only 2 characters. In the newlyweds story, 2 instances of a noun with no case marking occur in the initial discourse reporting event, where the wife is the speaker. And the second one occurs at the possible start of a new episode, where there's a time shift between the preceding clause and the discourse reporting event. So the use of the unmarked noun example in the initial report seems to match the pattern from the previous text, but it's not immediately clear why this second occurs. Og is only used when the wife is the speaker, and nog is used for both characters. And as I said before, there are 6 times when there is no overt marking of the speaker in the discourse reporting event. Actually, I think there's a typo on this slide, but there are 6 null speaker events. The newlyweds text only has 11 clauses. Only has 11 reports. So the 6 out of 35 in the bottom row should read 6 out of 11. With the deer and snail story, 5 of the 7 reports have no speaker indicated. As there are only 2 characters, you can tell from the exchange who is speaking, and you can tell from the narration which character is most likely to be the speaker. The knee marking is only used in the final exchange between the 2 characters, 1 instance each. Now, a few remarks on other things seen in the data. Remember that this is a preliminary survey, and each one of these points could be investigated further. The first finding is that the reported speech annotation template for ELAN by Nikitina et al. 2019 seems sufficient for capturing the range of structures that occur in Western Subanon at the QT level. As a product of its design, it does not capture ordering phenomena on the QT tier. However, with the ordering information available from the RP tier, one can query for relevant ordering phenomena. The reported speech template was designed initially for looking at data from West Africa, and there was a comparative component that also looked at Turkic and Tungusic languages. But we can see that this template also can capture the phenomena for at least this Austronesian language. The second point, larger discourse reporting events tend to occur in the introductory and final reports within a narrative, or possibly at the end of an episode. For example, in the cat and rat story, when there's a shift between the rat speaking to the first hornbill and the rat encountering the second hornbill character, there's a large discourse reporting event that contains a speech verb, an overt mention of the speaker, location information, a quotative, and this large unit seems to mark the boundary of the episodes. In the newlyweds text that has only human speakers, the central dialogue exchange occurs with no introductory material before the reports. And then the introductory material reoccurs as the story closes. So at the start of the text, there are clauses that mean something like, and the wife said to her husband. But then as the tension mounts and there's a conflict between the husband and wife, the introductory material goes away and it shifts to more like a performance between the husband and wife, where the context and the exchange are what indicate who is speaking. And then in all instances within the 3 texts, when no introductory material, meaning a discourse reporting event or the quotative long, occurs before a report begins, the first element of the report is a short interjection-like word that may serve to mark the left boundary of the report. The cat and rat story uses the most diverse verbs to introduce reports, whereas newlyweds and deer and snail use a diverse set of introductory structures, such as bear quotes, quotatives, and different orders for DR event and reports. So where cat and rat employ only a discourse reporting event, a speech verb, and often a noun referring to the speaker, the other 2 stories vary between the other options. Related to indicating speaker, the case marking used for speakers varies greatly across the 3 texts. And finally, 2 additional observations not yet mentioned in this talk. In cat and rat, when Og marks the speaker, Nog never marks the addressee. In a typical transitive clause where agent voice is used, Og would mark the agent and Nog would mark the patient. But Nog can mark a report. And in that way, it's used as a marker of a complement or perhaps a developing complementizer. In cat and rat, Nog occurs 7 out of 36 times, introducing a report or immediately before the report. And it is always used when there is a characteristic sound of one of the animals. So for example, when cat is reported as saying meow, meow is preceded by Nog, even if the report continues on further. So this has been a brief introduction to the domain of reported speech in Western Subanon. We have some references here for you and want to say thank you for your time. And we look forward to your comments and questions.